maybe you've heard of the Spanish lisp, maybe you haven't. If you haven't, generally what people like to say is that, a Spanish monarch, maybe it was a king, maybe it was a queen, I don't know, I've heard both, had a lisp. And so in order to copy the monarch, or to be polite to the monarch, everybody else developed this lisp as well, and then Spanish had a lisp. Is that how it happened? And if so, which monarch was it? Hey, it's Hazlett, back in my closet studio. Time for another linguistics lesson. Today we're going to look at the Spanish theta, or th, as we speak in Peninsular Spanish, specifically the Madrid dialect, which everyone else loves to make fun of. So people from Latin America, I think it's hilarious to make fun of the way people speak in Spain. And North Americans who learn Mexican Spanish, sorry, let me rephrase. English-speaking North Americans who learn North American Spanish also think it's pretty funny to make fun of the way that people from Spain speak Spanish because they learned the other Spanish. So maybe you've heard of the Spanish lisp, maybe you haven't. If you haven't, generally what people like to say is that, a Spanish monarch, maybe it was a king, maybe it was a queen, I don't know, I've heard both, had a lisp. And so in order to copy the monarch, or to be polite to the monarch, everybody else developed this lisp as well, and then Spanish had a lisp. Is that how it happened? And if so, which monarch was it? Spoiler alert, no, that's not actually what happened. There's no documentation of any monarch having a lisp. But further, it's not a lisp. It's not that the theta sound in Peninsular Spanish has totally replaced the s sound, or the sibilant sound that exists in other Spanish. So in English, we say thank you. And if you were to say thank you, that would be a little weird. We have both the theta sound and the S sound in English. That's part of our sound system, and it's totally normal. In Peninsular Spanish, they have the same distinction between theta and sibilant S. So they say gracias in Peninsular Spanish, which clearly demonstrates they have both sounds, just like English. Of course, in Latin and Spanish, they don't have the theta sound, so they just say gracias, as in thank you. So first of all, it's not a lisp. But that doesn't really answer the question. Why is there the theta sound in Peninsular Spanish, but not in Mexican Spanish? I wrote a paper about this in university, and it's pretty confusing. Partly because I don't really know anything about Latin, and you have to go back to the Latin to really find out why it happened. So I'm going to try and oversimplify here. And the oversimplification is there's a bunch of sounds in Latin, mainly the k, g, t, d, s, and then the front vowels e and e. Basically did a whole bunch of crazy stuff, because when people were making these sounds were appearing in words, they started to make all these changes to the sounds, and this developed differently in different parts of the world. So in Italy, it gave birth to Italian. On the Peninsular, the Spanish Peninsula, or the Iberian Peninsula, it gave birth to a whole bunch of different languages that eventually were overtaken by the language of the Kingdom of Castile and became Spanish, known as Spanish. But it also gave birth to Portuguese and French. And all those changes happening eventually, amongst other things, gave birth to these distinct languages, of course. But it's these specific sounds that are all up interact near the front of the mouth. I mean, the k and the g aren't near the front of the mouth, but they're next to the palate. And the palate is next to the alveolar ridge in your mouth. So the k and the g are velar, so that's, back there, G, and then the palate is kind of right there, that like scoopy part of the top of your roof of your mouth. And the alveolar ridge is just behind your teeth. It's that little ridge, and then your teeth. So all up along here in the top of the mouth, there's all these sounds there that were interacting with each other and changing all around and basically playing musical chairs. And so the spelling got all kind of crazy and didn't reflect anymore the sounds that were being made by the speakers, which is actually like what we have in English today. The spelling doesn't reflect necessarily the sounds that the speakers are making. Anyways, long story short, there developed this cluster of sounds in Spanish, ranging from which is how they still make a S sound in Madrid, to sh, to th, which is like a S, but if you put your tongue right at your teeth. And so these sounds are all really close to each other. Sh, sh, th. You can see why they were all distinct phonemes, so they were distinct from each other, but they're really, really close in sound. So a natural thing that happens in language change in a situation like that is there's a change so that they're more distinguishable. So what happened to the sh sound is that it moved back to the velar and became ha. In Latin America, it became ha. But in Peninsular Spanish, in the Madrid dialect, it became ha. The s sound pretty much stayed where it is. They still use that sound today. S. And the th sound moved forward in between the teeth and became th. And it kind of happened a little bit over time. I obviously don't think it happened immediately, but one of the interesting things that there's a few evidences of this starting to happen, and one is spelling mistakes, orthographical errors, where the spelling kind of reveals the use of those sounds or the lack of use of those sounds in Sevilla, the south of Spain, which is the dialect that was brought over to North America, as well as the spelling in Madrid. Another example or another evidence is there's this description of this person, Amado Alonso. So loved Alonso, Alonso the loved. He gave this description of the Bishop of Burgos, Alfonso de Santa Maria, and it's really hearsay. This is actually a description by Fernando del Pulgar, and this is what he said. He said he spoke very well with good grace. He lisped a little. His voice resonated very clearly, and he preached with singular grace. So, in Spanish, it was hablaba muy bien y con buena gracia. Ceceaba un poco. Su órgano resonaba muy claro y tenía singular gracia en sermonear. So, pronunciation of how he said that might have been a little different because that's with modern Spanish, the way that I said it. But clearly it was something that was kind of prestigious. He was trying to describe how this guy sounded and how he was a gifted speaker. So some of the spellings that kind of indicate this theta appearing is there were spellings appearing around 1547 for Trinidad and paternity, where the last consonant, the d, was written with a z. And that makes sense if you think about someone from Madrid saying Trinidad, they're going to say Trinidad. And so the last consonant is a theta. Or paternidad as well, the last consonant is a theta. And so the fact that they used Z for these spellings kind of indicates that whatever sound was being made there was not a D sound, even though we know the spelling of Trinidad is with a D and paternidad is also with a D. Anyways, there's also a little tidbit from John Mincheu's 1599 Dictionnaire in Spanish and English. He says that the sound of C is like that of th. So C followed by IRE in Spanish is the theta sound now, today. So perhaps in 1599 it was somewhere in between the th and the modern th, because the way that he described it being the same sound as th, th. Okay, so at any rate, it seemed to kind of happen slowly over time and was not attributable to any one person, having a lisp. It happened to specific sounds and not the sound that turned out to be s. That sound stayed stable throughout. So it clearly wasn't just because somebody was lisping. It was really because there were those three sounds that were really close together, and in order to distinguish those three sounds, they separated. One to the front of the mouth as far as it could go, and one to the back of the mouth as far as it could go. So we had the s turning to th, and the sh turning to ch. Yeah, so that's it. I guess the only other question to answer is, well, okay, fine. Why don't they speak that way in Latin America? Why don't they have the theta in Latin America? So the answer is, in Sevilla, which is in the south of Spain, that was also a center of commerce and culture that rivaled Spain, Madrid and Toledo. And so the language developed slightly differently down in Sevilla. And they didn't develop the theta. The s and the s merged into just s. And there was no theta developing there. And the sh went to ha, a softer h sound instead of the ch. And so everyone that went to the New World went through Sevilla. You would travel down to Sevilla, probably stay there for a while, and then you'd go from there to the Canary Islands, which was like a linguistic extension of Sevilla. And you would sail there, and you would probably stay there for some time before finally sailing over to the New World, where you would the whole time be surrounded by people speaking the Sevillan dialect, including the sailors and the settlers, including the females who, the wives and mothers raising their children speaking their own dialect. And so that's likely why Latin America speaks Spanish the way it does. It's also interesting to note that this change, the development of the theta sound in Spanish, was happening right about the time of the discovery of the New World. And so it hadn't fully taken root by 1492 necessarily. It only really started to take root about 100 years later or so. And so it was really, that theta sound was just appearing as people were moving to North America. Anyways, to sum up for you, if you ever hear somebody saying that people in Spain speak with a lisp because of a king or a queen who had a lisp, give them an intellectual smackdown by saying, first of all, it's not a lisp, and second of all, that's ridiculous. Of course it didn't happen that way. That doesn't make sense. And then you can tell them there are those three sounds, s, s, and sh, that were too close together. They needed to distinguish them because it was very confusing sounding, I suppose. And so s became th, and sh became ch. That's how it happened. Anyways, thanks for listening. Talk to you later.